851. Go ahead and disregard the checks. We got him at San Jacinto Pacific. Out there.
A young man died in a mysterious car crash. But was it an accident? Forensic science uncovered what really caused that crash. And the truth devastated 3 different families. Just before dawn in central Texas, a motorist saw a car on fire off the side of the road down an embankment. By the time firefighters got there was very little left.
I've never seen a car or a vehicle burn that badly before, where the wheels were melted to the rocks.
In the rubble, investigators found the remains of the driver burned beyond recognition.
We needed to identify the body that was in the vehicle, which wasn't much of a body.
The car was a 1999 Chevy Cavalier registered to Molly and Clay Daniels, a young couple with 2 small children who lived in nearby Leander, Texas. Police discovered that Molly Daniels was home with her children at the time of the accident.
She had called me relatively early that morning, hysterical because Clayton wasn't home and she had to get to work and he had the car and she didn't know where he was.
Through his personal effects, family members identified the remains as those of Clay Daniels.
They found the remains of some tennis shoes that Clay's family members identified as Clay's shoes. They found a Harley-Davidson pin that had gone on a hat that Clay used to wear, and a silver necklace that they identified as being Clay's.
I figured that Clayton had been drinking, was at a party somewhere, or just driving fast and lost control.
Clay Daniels, an unemployed automobile mechanic, was just 24 years old. Surprisingly, not everyone was sorry he was dead.
Absolutely, he's a loser. I've always felt that he was not the best material for her. And I wondered about being a daddy material, but it was her choice to make.
Others expressed the same sentiments at his funeral.
The memorial, that was a very interesting thing because there was just so much there. His best friend got up and spoke, and he actually told people that Clay was an asshole.
No, he wasn't very well liked. He seemed like sort of a loafer and a layabout and a sex offender. So, I mean, what good could you say about him?
Clay was not a model citizen. He had recently been convicted for the sexual assault of his 7-year-old cousin and was sentenced to 30 days in prison and 10 years probation. The crash occurred just 3 days before he was to start serving his time.
This car fire was June the 18th of 2004. Clay was supposed to be going to jail that Monday the 21st of 2004. And so they thought the timing of that was a little bit suspicious.
And police had another angle to pursue. The parents of the sexual assault victim were angry that Clay was sentenced to only 30 days in prison.
The sexual assault victim's father made comments prior to this accident that he wanted Clay to go away. So we were thinking maybe the father of the victim made Clay go away.
Nevertheless, the community reached out to Molly Daniels, a widow at the age of 21, who had 2 young children to support on an office receptionist salary.
My gosh, she had people sending her money. People she did not know sent her money. Her coworkers would put groceries in the house. They would do everything. They bent over backwards for her.
She got this discount babysitter in the neighborhood because she put up signs, "I'm the poor grieving widow and I need help with child care."
But that generosity ended when less than a month after Clay died, Molly told friends that she had a new boyfriend and that she was the beneficiary of Clay's $100,000 life insurance policy. Her own mother even turned on her.
Absolutely, she was raised better than this. There were days that I just kicked myself. What did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong?
Clay Daniels' family identified his burned remains by some of his personal items found in the car. There was very little that remained from the fire.
There's only 14 pounds of body mass that was remaining, and they didn't have a head, didn't have hands or fingers or toes, nothing to fingerprint.
But the medical examiner wanted to be sure, so he extracted the bone marrow from Clay Daniels' hip bone, hoping that enough of his mitochondria survived the fire for DNA testing. Since mitochondrial DNA is passed maternally, scientists would try to compare it to the mitochondrial DNA profile of Clay's mother, Lori. But testing would take up to 6 months.
It's not like on CSI on TV at all, so it doesn't happen within the span of an hour.
In the meantime, investigators noticed some inconsistencies at the accident scene. The lack of skid marks on the road indicated that Clay took no corrective action before the crash. The speed limit was 60 miles per hour, and the car was barely moving when it went down the embankment.
There was no momentum coming off the cliff. It looked as if somebody had just pushed it off or just drove off the cliff at a slow rate of speed, because all the rocks, the trees on the way down were disturbed in the path that the vehicle took.
And the car's gas tank was intact. This raised questions about the source of the fire.
My instincts told me that this was not an accident, that somebody was killed. And I stayed with that feeling. That's why I told the sergeant that I was calling the experts in.
That expert was arson investigator Janine Mather. The first thing she noticed was that the entire driver's seat had been consumed by fire.
Normal vehicle fires with a body inside, there usually is body fluids and remains on the seat. And in this case, there was no body fluids located in the vehicle and no remains on the seat.
Mather then checked all possible sources for a fire: the fuel lines, the ignition switch, the starter, the battery. Everything was intact.
I looked at the vehicle inside and out and underneath and ruled out all accidental causes of ignition.
Crime scene investigators gathered the fire debris and placed it in sealed canisters. At the lab, they inserted activated charcoal strips and then heated the cans. The strips were then put into a solvent and tested with gas chromatograph mass spectrometry. This revealed the fire was started with large amounts of charcoal lighter fluid.
When the results came back that it was positive for charcoal starter fluid, I knew that we had an arson, an intentionally set fire.
And just as investigators heard this news, they learned something else. Molly Daniels' sister, Melissa, had been visiting Molly when she experienced one of the most bizarre incidents she had ever encountered.
Melissa had gone in to get a Q-tip out of the bathroom, turned around and looked, and there was a guy laying in the floor of the closet, but his head was up in the corner and she couldn't see anything but from the waist down, and he was wearing boxers. And she went out to Molly and she goes, "There's a man asleep in your closet." She goes, "No, there's not."
But when Molly looked in her closet, she didn't see anyone there.
But things started getting kind of weird after that.
Needless to say, investigators found the incident suspicious and now wondered whether Molly was somehow involved in her husband's murder. 5 months after the car crash, the Sheriff's Department in Burnett County, Texas, finally got the results of the DNA test on the remains found in the car. The DNA revealed that the remains were not those of Clay Daniels.
When DNA came back and wasn't Clayton, we were like, where's Clayton and who is this person that was in the vehicle?
To find the answers, investigators put Clay's grieving wife Molly under surveillance. For days, her routine was perfectly normal until she met her new boyfriend, Jake Gregg, for lunch.
She got into that man's car, and then the two of them went off to Taco Bell.
investigators decided to go inside to get a better look at Molly's new boyfriend. When Captain Paul Nelson walked by their table, he noticed that Jake Gregg bore a striking resemblance to Clay Daniels, although his hair color was different.
I mean, he looked identical. If he could have crawled into that burrito, he probably would have.
But the man insisted he was Jake Gregg and produced a Texas identification card to prove it. But Captain Nelson didn't buy it and placed him under arrest. During police questioning, he finally admitted he was Clay Daniels.
Clay's brilliant disguise consisted of nothing more than dyeing his hair black. And other than that, he hadn't changed his appearance at all.
Clay had several motives for staging his death. He did not want to go to jail for 30 days, and he did not want to be a registered sex offender. And he had a $100,000 life insurance policy.
Molly insisted she knew nothing about Clay faking his own death until he came home one day about a month after the fire and told her what he had done.
She just tried to portray it like she didn't know that he was alive until he just called her out of the blue about a month later and said, "Hey, baby, I'm alive."
I find that very hard to believe. If my husband came back from the dead, I'd be asking a lot of questions and I'd be very mad.
Clay admitted it was he who was sleeping in the closet when Molly's sister saw him. He said Molly spoke loud enough that it woke him up, and he was able to get out of the closet before his sister-in-law returned.
Steve, there's no one here. I know that there was...
Clay said he planned to start a new life with Molly and the children after the $100,000 life insurance payment arrived.
They were going to go to Mexico, and he was going to have plastic surgery done on his face and have dental surgery done so he'd have teeth.
And Molly is going to have a tummy tuck too. Apparently, a little bonus of the plan, I guess they'd get so much money from the insurance.
Clay Daniels refused to identify the body burned in the car fire.
Clay never divulged any information to us to help our investigation.
Did they murder somebody? Did they find a dead homeless man? What did they do? How did they do this?
However, Clay was more than happy to talk to his fellow inmates.
I guess they're sitting up late at night, shooting the breeze, and Clay had told this cellmate that he had actually dug up a corpse from a graveyard, and that's what they had put in the car and set it on fire.
Investigators searched Pebble Mound Cemetery, the one closest to the site of the car fire. They knew from experience that criminals don't like to travel far with a corpse in the car. Sure enough, they found a grave close to the front gate that looked as if it had been tampered with.
I could tell that the grave was disturbed by the crevices and the holes that was left. The marker had been moved. The flowers had been moved. And I knew by looking at the other grave sites that that was not normal.
The headstone bore the name Charlotte Davis. She died 6 months before the car crash at the age of 81. Their suspicions were confirmed when they exhumed Charlotte's casket and discovered it was empty. Investigators now wanted to know whether Molly Daniels was involved, and if so, they needed evidence to prove it. Clay Daniels confessed to starting the arson fire and defrauding the insurance company of $100,000 in life insurance. His wife Molly denied any involvement, but investigators didn't believe her.
When Molly first talked to the police and told them that ridiculous story that she didn't know that Clay was still alive until a month later, she was sticking by that story for quite some time, and apparently that's what she'd been telling her lawyer too.
Investigators examined Molly's work computer, but they weren't optimistic. By this time, 6 months had passed since the car crash.
Depending on how often the computer is used, there's a possibility that some of the evidence that we would have recovered ordinarily would be overwritten.
But investigators got a huge break Molly's computer had been invaded by a keystroke virus right before the staged accident.
What the worm actually did was it recorded every letter, every window she opened, every email, just any kind of thing that she's typing in the computer, it recorded and into a text file and saved it.
Computer forensic experts did a word search to identify what kind of information Molly had been looking for on the internet.
We were finding words like unidentifiable body, forensics on a body, burned car, gasoline fire, 1500 degrees Fahrenheit, just words like that.
This proved that Molly not only knew about Clay's plans, but was actively involved.
Oh, it was the happiest day of my life when we got that computer forensic exam. It was just, I mean, there was no way she could deny that she had been involved from day one of the planning when we saw that computer forensic evidence.
What does surprise me is that she was too stupid to do this. She was so stupid that she did this kind of thing and didn't think about the consequences and didn't think about possibility of getting caught.
Police obtained a search warrant for Molly's house and found even more forensic evidence.
During the search warrant of their residence, we found in the kitchen 2 containers of charcoal starter fluid. Both of them were tested, and one was consistent with what was found in the vehicle.
Prosecutors believe that Clay and Molly planned this crime for months. They looked in the obituaries to identify a grave to rob. Ideally, someone elderly who didn't have many family members visiting her grave. They chose 81-year-old Charlotte Davis. 6 months after her death, they dug up her body, drove to the ravine, and set fire to their car, with Charlotte's body inside. Clay threw some of his personal items in the fire so they could be used for identification. But the DNA testing proved the body wasn't Clay Daniels, and gas chromatography found remnants of the lighter fluid. When confronted with all this evidence, Molly Daniels finally confessed.
She said that they watched a lot of Law & Order and CSI, and they got the idea to do this from those shows. And I asked her, do y'all not watch the end of the shows? Because usually the criminals get caught. And she just laughed.
Molly Daniels pleaded guilty to insurance fraud and hindering her husband's apprehension. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison.
You do the crime, you do the time.
Clay Daniels pled guilty to insurance fraud, arson, and desecration of a corpse. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison, plus an additional 20 years for the sexual assault charge. The body of Charlotte Davis was reinterred. The people carrying her casket were the ones who put Clay and Molly behind bars. Texas investigators say it is among the most bizarre cases they've ever seen. They were also appalled by the deception Molly and Clay perpetrated on their own children.
To tell a little boy who's 4, almost 5 years old, that the man that he has known his whole life as his father is not his daddy when he runs to him and hugs him and says, "Hey, Daddy, I love you." To have the man say, "Oh, I'm not your daddy, I'm Mommy's new boyfriend, Jake." And to have Molly tell him that over and over, "No, that's not Daddy, that's Jake." You can't even imagine what that would do to a child's mind.
You just hope that their children get proper mental care the next couple of years and get raised well by their grandparents, because otherwise you can have another Clayton Daniels on our hands in 15 years.
Without the science, investigators were convinced that Clayton and Molly Daniels might have gotten away with it.
They thought that the fire would destroy all evidence and there wouldn't be enough remains for DNA testing. And they were almost right.
Lowest scum walks of life. I mean, they don't deserve to be on this planet. But that's just my personal opinion.
If it hadn't have been for everybody being on their toes in this case, listening to their gut, listening to their instincts, and then pursuing all the DNA, the forensic investigation, the arson investigation, we wouldn't be where we are today with these two people in prison.